No pause, no shift in his four iridescent eyes, no adjustment in the smooth, practiced rhythm of his translator-fed voice. He said it right there in the middle of the grand conclave chamber, between a trade remark and a border clarification, like it was something you just slipped in and moved past. The infant casualties at Muravel were, of course, regrettable. However, given the documented reproductive rates of the human species, the net demographic impact falls well within statistical recovery margins. He even pulled up a chart. I was standing at the back wall of the observation gallery, third row of security detail, holding a tablet I had not looked at in 40 minutes. My job was to watch the doors. I was watching the ambassador instead. Somebody in the human delegation coughed. That was the only sound. I looked down at my tablet, then at the floor, then at the small bag beside my boot that held my lunch, my spare earpiece, and a handful of pens I had been meaning to organize for 3 weeks. I reached in and took one out, clicked it, put it back, took out another one. Around me, the conclave chamber hummed with the usual background noise of 41 alien species conducting interstellar diplomacy. The atmospheric processors pushed recycled air in slow, measured cycles. Somewhere near the HFY section, a delegate was chewing something that smelled like burned copper. Normal routine, a Tuesday. Except that 2 minutes ago a man with 4 eyes, and a chart had just explained that 2,000 dead human children were a rounding error. I counted my pens, 1, 2, 3. The click of each one was very loud in my own ears. At the front of the human delegation table, our lead ambassador, a woman named Claire Voss, had not moved. She was 61 years old, had negotiated 7 interstellar treaties, and wore the same expression she probably wore when reading bad weather reports. Calm, flat, the kind of face that has decided some years ago that showing anything is a choice and not a reflex. Her left hand, resting on the table, had closed very slowly into a shape that was not quite a fist. I noticed that. I filed it somewhere. The Vraxi ambassador moved to his next slide. 2 of the conclave's senior facilitators nodded along. One of the Meth Vori delegates typed a note into his data pad. The Gethur Raleigh representative in the 3rd tier leaned toward his neighbor and said something low that his translator kept politely private. But his body language, even across species, read clearly enough. Reasonable, the math checks out. I had been enlisted for 14 months. Before that, I was a xenobiology student at the Carver Institute on New Manila, 2 years into a doctorate on atmospheric biosignatures, with a shared apartment and a sister who video called me every Sunday, and a life that was, in its ordinary way, full. I do not think about that version of my life very much anymore. What I think about, standing in this chamber, is a thing my training officer said on day 3 of basic. He was an older man, broad through the shoulders, with the specific kind of quiet that comes from having seen a lot and chosen to carry it without noise. His name was Corporal Dane, and he said this: "Every species in this galaxy has a breaking point. The difference is what they break toward." I had written it down at the time, because it sounded like the kind of thing you write down. I understood it now. The ambassador finished his presentation. He folded his primary hands and looked pleasantly toward the human delegation table, the way you look at someone after you have explained a thing clearly and are waiting for them to confirm they followed. Claire Voss stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not use her prepared remarks. She stood up, and the entire chamber did the thing large rooms do when something shifts in them without any physical reason, that collective, animal refocusing of attention that has nothing to do with sound or movement, and everything to do with a change in the air. "Ambassador," she said, "do you have young?" He blinked, all 4 eyes in sequence, the way Vraxi do when they are parsing an unexpected question. "Of course, I have 2 clutches. The eldest are nearly through their secondary stage of..." "Leave this chamber," Claire said. "Go home, tell them you love them." She paused. "This is the last time that warning comes free." She sat back down. She picked up her water glass and took a slow, composed sip, as though she had just finished a point about trade tariffs. The Vraxi ambassador stared at her for a long moment. His chart was still on the display behind him. The bar graphs still showed their clean, clinical lines, net demographic impact, recovery margin, all very orderly. Then he looked, briefly, at the rest of the human delegation. All 14 of them were watching him with the same expression. Not anger, something quieter than anger, something that had been sitting in a room by itself for a long time, getting very still, getting very settled, getting very sure of what it was going to do next. He closed his data presentation. The facilitator called a recess. I did not move from my post. I stood at the back wall and listened to the chamber empty out around me, the shuffle of varied limbs and translated murmurs, and the hiss of atmospheric seals opening and closing on the corridor doors. When the room was nearly empty, I looked down at my bag. My pens were in a pile on the floor. I had taken every single one of them out without realizing it. All 11. They had rolled in different directions across the polished stone floor, little scattered lines pointing nowhere. I crouched down and began picking them up, one at a time. I was very careful about it. I put each one back. I zipped the bag. I stood up. My hands were completely steady. That, more than anything, was what told me something had changed in the last 20 minutes. Not in the room. In me. The part that shook had finished shaking, and what was underneath it was something I did not have a name for yet, but recognized the way you recognize a voice you have not heard in years. The recess lasted 40 minutes. When the delegates filed back in, the Vraxi ambassador took his seat and did not look at the human table. The facilitator called the session to order. Claire Voss opened her prepared remarks, voice even, tone professional, words measured and precise. The session continued. But the session was not the thing that mattered anymore. What mattered was already in motion, the way a tide is already in motion long before it reaches the shore, long before anyone standing on the sand has any reason to look up. I took my post at the back wall. I watched the doors. I did not look at the Vraxi ambassador again. I did not need to. The 60-day started the morning after the recess. Nobody announced them formally. There was no speech, no address to the fleet, no dramatic declaration broadcast across the communication arrays. Command simply issued a standing order that all non-essential diplomatic proceedings were suspended, all human personnel were to remain at assigned postings, and all available administrative units were to report to data processing by 0600. I reported to data processing. The room they put us in was large and plain, with long tables and individual terminals and overhead lighting that stayed at the same flat, white brightness for all 14 hours of each shift. There was no window. There was a water dispenser in the corner that made a soft clunking sound every time someone used it, which was often, because the air recyclers ran dry in that room, and everyone was always thirsty. My supervisor was a man named Corporal Pete Alcott, 32, from somewhere in the English Midlands. With reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose even though they fit fine. He handed me my assignment on a data card and said 4 words. "Read them out loud." I looked at the card, all of them. Every name. He went back to his own terminal. I sat down. The file opened. Murreville Colony, Population Registry, cross-referenced against the post-incident casualty report from the Vraxi engagement 6 months prior. The names of the children were organized by age, youngest first. I read the first name out loud, the way Alcott had told me to. Quietly, not for the room, just enough to move air. Then the second. Then the third. I do not know why he told us to read them aloud. I did not ask. By day 2, I had stopped questioning it, because I had begun to understand that it was not an administrative instruction. It was something else. A reckoning of a different kind, the difference between knowing a number and knowing a name, between a chart with bar graphs and a voice saying a word that was a person. On day 9, I reached a name and stopped. The water dispenser clunked in the corner. Alcott pushed his glasses up. I looked at the name for a moment. Then I read it out loud, the way I had read the ones before it and the ones before those, and I moved to the next line. I kept reading. Around me, across the long tables, other voices were doing the same thing. Low, steady, unhurried. A murmur that filled the flat-lit room from 0600 to 2000 every day for 14 hours, names moving through the air and disappearing, one after another, each one landing somewhere it would not come back from. 2,291 names. On day 12, a HFY negotiator arrived. He was experienced. The briefing note said he had handled 43 interspecies conflicts across a career spanning 6 decades. His name was long and untranslatable, so the diplomatic liaison called him Representative Vell. He was patient. He was composed. He opened the meeting with Ambassador Voss by acknowledging, in careful diplomatic language, that the human response to juvenile loss was a documented psychological pattern, that grief curves had been modeled, that statistically. Voss slid something across the table. It was a printed document bound at the edge, plain cover, no graphics. 2,291 pages. Read it, she said, all of it, then we talk about curves. Vell looked at the document. He picked it up. He read the first page and the second, and on the third he slowed down, and by the 11th he stopped, set it carefully on the table, and asked for a recess. He calmed his government from the secure relay 6 hours later. The message was intercepted and archived. I read the transcript 3 months afterward when it was declassified. It was 11 sentences long. The one that stayed with me was the 7th. I do not believe they are processing grief. I believe they are converting it. I do not have a model for what comes after conversion. He was right. He did not have the model because no one had built it. You cannot model a thing that has never existed before. And this, the registry, the reading, the flat-lit room with the dry air and the clunking water dispenser, this was not grief management. It was not therapy. It was not a stage in a cycle. It was preparation of a very specific kind. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that simply, methodically, lays each stone in its place and does not stop until the foundation is complete. On day 19, I finished my section of the registry and was assigned a second one. I reported at 0600. I sat down. I read. In the evenings after shift, I walked the corridor outside the data room and looked out the single porthole at the end of the hall. Stars. The same stars that had always been there, indifferent and enormous, burning the way stars burn, which is to say completely and without stopping and for a very long time. I thought about what my training officer had said. Every species has a breaking point. The difference is what they break toward. On day 31, the fleet began to move. Not fast, not with noise or visible urgency. Ship by ship, across 17 systems, human vessels shifted from holding patterns to transit coordinates. Supply lines opened. Engineering crews ran diagnostics that were not routine. Navigation units filed course adjustments that were not logged under standard operations. The conclave's monitoring stations noted the movement. Their threat assessment teams ran their models. The models returned results the senior analysts filed for secondary review because the primary outputs looked wrong. They were not wrong. On day 44, the Murreville Doctrine was formally registered with the Galactic Conclave Legal Office, not as a declaration of conflict, not under any existing framework for interspecies military action. under a new framework, written in 30 days by a team of human legal scholars, diplomatic architects, and one retired judge who had lost her grandson in the Muravel engagement and had not slept more than 4 hours a night since. The framework had no name in any other language. The human term for it translated, imperfectly, as something between a debt with no ceiling and an account that does not close. It had no expiration clause. It had no negotiation mechanism. It had no forgiveness architecture. The conclave's legal review team read it 3 times. Then a senior counsel sent an internal note to the facilitator's office that was later made public during the post-doctrine hearings. The note said, "This is not a declaration of war. I am not certain we have a category for what this is. I recommend we find one quickly." They did not find one quickly enough. On day 60, the window closed. I was back at my posting, security detail, a different chamber, a smaller session, a routine interspecies commerce review that no one was paying attention to anymore. I had my tablet, I had my bag, I had my pens, all 11 of them, organized and clipped together the way I had organized them every morning for 60 days. A message came through on the Fleet channel at 0800. It was 4 words. "The registry is complete." I looked at those words for a long moment. Then I put my tablet under my arm and watched the door, the way I was supposed to, the way I had been doing, steady and quiet and very, very sure. Outside, across 17 systems, the fleet was already moving. We breached the command vessel at 0420. The corridor was narrow, lit in the Vraxi's preferred spectrum, which ran heavy into violet and made everyone's skin look like they had just come out of very cold water. My helmet compensated. I kept my eyes forward and my steps measured, and I did not think about anything except the next corner and the next door, and the position of the 4 people moving behind me. Our unit was 8. I was 3rd in line. The team lead was a man named Corporal Glenn Marsh, 28, from somewhere outside of Bristol, who communicated almost entirely in hand signals and had not, in 3 weeks of shared assignment, said anything to me that wasn't operationally necessary. I respected that enormously. The Vraxi command vessel was not a warship in the way humans build warships. It was layered, organic in its architecture, rooms that curved into one another without straight angles, corridors that branched and looped back in patterns that made your inner ear do something unpleasant. Their military philosophy was different from ours. They did not build for confrontation. They built for containment. That had not helped them today. We moved through the 3rd corridor, and Marsh held up a fist. We stopped. Ahead through the curved wall there was sound. Not the sound of personnel, not the creak and hiss of a ship under pressure. Something softer, slower. Marsh looked at me. I was the unit's secondary on non-standard identification, which was a formal way of saying I had spent 2 years studying alien biology and was therefore useful when the situation stopped being standard. I moved forward and put my hand flat on the curved wall. The material was warm, slightly porous, responsive in the way certain biological structures are responsive, registering pressure, adjusting temperature. Not a structural wall. A nesting wall. I stepped back and looked at Marsh. "Clutch room," I said quietly. He was silent for a moment. Behind us, the rest of the unit waited. Down the corridor to our left, we could hear the Vraxi commander. He was audible now, translator running, his voice carrying the specific high-frequency harmonic that their species produced under acute distress. He was saying words about mercy, about the unhatched young, about the rules of engagement under galactic law, which he was citing with surprising accuracy for a man who had spent 6 months filing Muravel as acceptable yield. I did not look down the corridor. I looked at the wall. The nesting wall, warm under my hand, full of lives that had not chosen any of this, that did not know what a doctrine was or what a registry was, or what it meant when a species ran out of a particular kind of patience. I stepped back. "Post Kowalski here," I said to Marsh. "Nothing enters this room. Nothing exits without clearance. We continue to the command node." Marsh looked at me for 2 seconds. Then he signaled Kowalski to the wall position and moved us forward. We took the command node in 11 minutes. The Vraxi commander was brought into custody at 0540. He was unhurt. He was shaking in the deep, full-body way that Vraxi shake when their threat system engages and cannot find an exit. His 4 eyes moved from face to face among our unit, trying to find something he recognized, some expression or signal he could map onto a known category. He was not going to find it. He said through his translator, "My young." "Are guarded," Marsh said. The commander stared at him. "You are protecting them," he said. It was not a question. It was the sound of a man trying to process a piece of information that did not fit any model he had been given. Marsh said nothing. I was filling out the custody intake form on my tablet, which was tedious and necessary, and kept my hands occupied. "You are protecting them," the commander said again. After what, he stopped. His translator struggled for a moment with something, then produced a word that came out not quite right, some Vraxi concept that did not survive the conversion to English intact. "After the account, after the doctrine, after everything." "Yes," I said, without looking up from my tablet. He was quiet for a long time. I finished the form. I looked up. He was still staring at the corridor behind us, at the place where Kowalski stood in front of the nesting wall with his back straight and his eyes forward, and his entire bearing communicating, without any ambiguity, that nothing was getting past him. "Then what are you?" the commander said. I thought about that. "Consistent," I said. I submitted the intake form. We secured the vessel by 0700 and filed our report by 0830. 3 other units had cleared 2 additional command structures by noon. The operation ran across 9 Vraxi installations in total, all of them selected by the doctrine's targeting framework, all of them connected to the authorization chain that had approved the Merhavel engagement. Not random, not broad, exact. The Conclave's observation stations recorded everything. Their threat assessment teams, the ones that had run the models that kept returning outputs the analysts didn't trust, ran them again. The outputs were the same. This time no one filed them for secondary review. The senior analyst on duty sent a message directly to the facilitator general. It was short. It said, "They are not trying to win a war. They are settling a specific account. I do not know what happens when the account is settled. I do not know if it settles." That last sentence kept getting quoted afterward, in articles, in briefings, in the speeches that various conclave members delivered to their home governments in the weeks that followed. I do not know if it settles. Neither did we, honestly. But that was not the point. The point was the registry. 2,291 names, read aloud in a flat-lit room by people with dry throats and steady hands, for 14 hours a day, for 60 days. That was the point. Everything else was just what the point looked like when it moved. The conclave emergency session was held 22 days after the doctrine operations concluded. I was in the gallery. I had filed for observer credentials through the diplomatic corps reassignment I had requested 3 months earlier, before the 60 days started, back when I was still not entirely sure what I was doing or why, only that sitting in a security posting watching doors did not feel like enough anymore. The session was not broadcast. The chamber held 400 delegates from 41 species, plus their staff, plus observers like me in the tiered gallery above the main floor. The atmospheric processors worked hard. The room smelled like recycled air and something faintly mineral, the way rooms smell when there are too many different kinds of biology in them at once. The facilitator general called the session to order. She was Methvari, 800 and some years old, with the particular stillness of very old things that have survived enough to stop being startled. She had been present at the founding of 6 conclave charters. She had overseen the resolution of wars that predated humanity's first radio signal. She looked tired. She introduced the primary presenter without ceremony. A threat analyst named Dr. Oren Vale, also Methvari, with 400 years in conflict assessment and a record of briefings that other analysts cited the way humans cite foundational texts. He walked to the presentation platform. He did not use slides. "I have prepared a comparative analysis," he said, "of every documented interspecies armed conflict recorded in conclave archives over the past 3,000 years. 47 conflicts. I will not present all 47 today. I will present the relevant finding." The chamber was very quiet. Every conflict in the record has what I will call a terminal architecture, a set of conditions, internal or external, that cause the initiating party to cease sustained engagement. These conditions vary by species but are consistent in type. They include resource exhaustion, political fracture, casualty threshold tolerance, economic pressure, and what I categorize as grief saturation. He paused. Grief saturation is the condition in which a population has experienced sufficient loss that the psychological and social cost of continued engagement exceeds the perceived value of the original objective. All 47 conflicts in the record contain a grief saturation curve. It is, in my assessment, the single most reliable predictor of conflict termination across species lines. He looked out at the chamber. "I have run the human engagement through this model 11 times. I have had 3 colleagues run independent analyses. I am presenting the consensus result." He let that sit for a moment. The grief saturation model does not apply. A sound moved through the chamber that was not quite a sound. A shift, a collective adjustment, all 400 delegates recalibrating something at the same moment. The trigger event for human engagement was harm to offspring. In every other species in the record, this trigger initiates a grief response that follows a documentable arc. Initial intensity, peak response, gradual attenuation over time. The curve always comes down, in every case, without exception. We cannot find the attenuation in the human data. He said it plainly. No drama. The way you state a finding when the finding is strange enough that adding drama to it would feel dishonest. We have sampled human accounts of this event going back across their history. Parental loss of offspring, communal loss of children in conflict, generational accounts of harm to the young. The intensity does not attenuate with time in the way our models predict. We have documented cases of humans acting on grief that is 40 years old, 60 years old. We interviewed a woman, 83 years of age, confined to a medical facility, who was still pursuing legal action over a child lost in a minor trade route incident 11 years prior. The case had no strategic value. She was not pursuing it for strategic value. He glanced down at the notes in his hand, set them on the platform. She was pursuing it because he was her grandson and someone was responsible, and she had not finished yet. The chamber was completely still. "This is the finding," Dr. Vale said. "The human species does not possess a grief saturation threshold in relation to offspring loss, or if they possess one, we cannot locate it, and we have looked very hard. The implication is significant and I want to be direct about it." He looked across the floor of the chamber, then up at the gallery. "Any action that harms human young does not initiate a conflict with a terminal clause. We have no evidence that it terminates. We have no model that predicts when or whether it terminates. We have historical data suggesting it does not." He picked up his notes again. I recommend that every member of this conclave review their historical record of interactions with human colonial and civilian populations, particularly incidents involving young. I recommend this review be thorough. I recommend it be honest. He stepped back from the platform. I have no further presentation. I am available for questions. For a moment no one spoke. Then the HFY delegate in the second tier raised his communication flag and asked in a very careful voice whether the analysis accounted for political change, generational distance, and the moderating effect of diplomatic resolution. Dr. Vale said, yes, it does not change the finding. The HFY delegate asked whether the human legal framework, the doctrine, had any built-in expiration mechanism. Dr. Vale said no. A Vraxi delegate, one of 3 remaining in conclave standing, asked nothing. He sat very still in his seat and looked at the floor and did not look up for the rest of the session. I was in the gallery with a notepad that I had brought because I thought I might want to take notes. I had written one word. I looked at it for a moment. Then I put the notepad away. After the session, outside the chamber, in the wide corridor with its high ceilings and the long windows that looked out over the station's observation deck, I stood and watched other species walk past me. All moving with purpose, all going somewhere, to meetings, to communications relays, to their ships, to whatever recalculation they needed to make after sitting in that room for 2 hours. A Methvori staff member stopped near me, young, by their standards, probably only 150 years or so. He looked at me with the polite directness that his species used when they wanted to ask something. You were in the gallery, he said. Yes. Were you at Muravel? No, I said. Someone I knew was. He nodded. He seemed to be deciding something. Then he said, the analyst's finding, does it seem accurate to you from a personal standpoint? I thought about the data room, the flat light, the water dispenser, 11 pens on a floor. A name on a screen that I read aloud and moved past and did not stop moving. Yes, I said. He nodded again slowly. I see. He walked on. I watched the observation deck for a while longer. Stars, the unnamed ones, the ones that burn long and don't care, which is not a comfort exactly but is at least a kind of company. Then I went to file my observer report and get back to work. The posting after the doctrine was quiet. A patrol sector 3 systems from the nearest active diplomatic zone, designated low priority, assigned mostly to vessels that needed routine operational hours and crews that needed, in the language of the transfer orders, a period of stabilization. I did not argue with the transfer. The ship was called the Arcadia, which was a name I appreciated for its particular kind of irony. 112 crew, standard patrol configuration, long shifts with long stretches of nothing happening, which I was finding, to my own mild surprise, that I did not mind. My bunk had a window. It was the first bunk I had ever had with a window, and it was small, and the frame rattled slightly when the hull adjusted to temperature changes, and the view was a fixed arc of stars that did not change because we were on a loop pattern. But I sat in it every evening after shift and looked out and found that this was something I needed without having known I needed it. The commendation arrived on a Tuesday. I read it once, filed it in the administrative folder on my personal terminal, and did not think about it again. 2 grades of promotion came through the same week. I updated my uniform designation. Alcott sent a short message from his new posting that said only, "Knew you would." I sent back, "Thanks for the pen thing." He did not reply, but I knew he understood. The conclave changes happened slowly and then quickly, the way things do when enough pressure has been building in enough places for long enough. 3 civilizations submitted voluntary reports to the Human Diplomatic Office, detailed historical records of any past incidents involving human colonial populations where civilian harm had occurred. unprompted. No negotiation, no request from our side, no formal mechanism through which these reports were owed. They just sent them. The HFY report covered a mining incident from 62 years prior, a colonial extraction operation that had displaced a small human settlement, including, in the civil records, a number of children. The incident had been logged at the time as a routine territorial adjustment. It had never been flagged for diplomatic review. No one had filed anything. Someone on the HFY side had gone looking anyway. I read the summary of their report on the patrol ship's news relay and sat with it for a while. 62 years. They had gone back 62 years because they had sat in that chamber and listened to Dr. Vale and done the only logical thing, which was to look at their own history and find out what they might be holding without knowing it. That, I thought, was a kind of intelligence that had nothing to do with technology or weaponry or the size of a fleet. On a Thursday evening, I was sitting in my window bunk when a priority message came through on the ship's secure relay, addressed to all senior personnel, copied to Ambassador Voss. It was from the Vraxi government. Formal, carefully worded, routed through 7 intermediary diplomatic channels, which told you something about how carefully they had thought about sending it. Subject line, regarding the Muravel registry. I opened it. They had compiled a document, their own registry, names of those lost on their side during the doctrine operations, service personnel, administrative staff, 2 civilian contractors who had been at the wrong installation at the wrong time. They had added their document to ours. Not as a counterclaim, not as a grievance, not as a legal challenge or a diplomatic maneuver. They had simply sent their names to go alongside our names, in the same registry, under the same account. I sat with that for a long time. The hull rattled faintly. Stars turned their slow arc in the window. I forwarded the message to Ambassador Voss with one line: "They are learning." She replied in under a minute. "File it under the registry, all debts, both directions." I filed it. Then I put my tablet down and looked out the window. I have a photograph. It lives in the inside pocket of my kit bag, which goes everywhere I go because I have not yet decided what the right distance from it is. The photograph is printed on actual paper, which is something my mother insisted on for every important photograph, because she said screens fail and paper endures, and she was usually right about things like that. In the photograph, my sister is 4 years old. She has my mother's nose. She has the stubborn set to her jaw that ran through every generation on my father's side like a fault line. She is holding a toy alien. Cheap plastic, green, 3 eyes, the kind that used to come out of vending machines at transit stations when vending machines were still a thing transit stations had. She is holding it like it is the most important thing she has ever been given. She thought aliens were going to be friendly. She had only ever encountered them in movies and vending machine toys and the illustrated books she made our mother read to her 3 times in a row. And in all of those places, they were curious and kind and interested in humans in a good way, in the way you are interested in something wonderful. She was 4 years old. I have decided that she was right. I know how that sounds. I know the math. I know what Muravel was, what the doctrine was, what the sessions were, and what the registry was, and what it meant that a woman who was 83 years old and confined to a medical bed was still filing challenges over her grandson because she was not finished yet. I know all of that. And I have decided that my sister was right. Not because the galaxy is full of friendly species who wish us well. It is not, or at least not reliably. Not because things are better now, though some things are. Not because the registry is closed, because it is not closed, because it does not close, because that is the nature of it. But because she held that toy with both hands and smiled at it, and the fact that she believed in something good means that something good existed. Right there in that photograph. Right there in that moment that is still happening in the way that past moments keep happening inside the people who carry them. She gets to have been right about that. I am not taking that from her. I put the photograph away. Outside the window, the unnamed planet we had been orbiting on our loop pattern came into view again, the third time tonight. Large and slow and indifferent to everything in the way planets are indifferent to everything, which is completely and without apology, and for an extremely long time. A new message came through on the relay. I looked at the sender. Methvori Diplomatic Office, flagged priority. The subject line was long and formal, but the first 3 words were the ones that mattered. Voluntary Historical Review. Another one. I opened it, read the summary, made a note, forwarded it to the registry office with the standard intake form attached and a brief cover line noting the relevant historical period. Then I sat back and looked at the planet. There is a thing that happens when you have been carrying weight for a long time and something shifts, not the weight going away, because it does not go away, but you finding a different way to hold it, a position that is less about bracing and more about balance. It does not feel like relief exactly. It feels like your hands remembering what they are for. My hands at this moment were resting on my knees, not holding anything, not shredding anything. Just my hands in my lap in a bunk with a rattling window, on a quiet ship in a quiet sector, watching a planet turn. I had eaten dinner an hour ago. Real food, recognizable food, something that tasted like the thing it was supposed to taste like. I had not had that for most of a year. I ate the whole thing and did not think about anything while I ate it, which was its own kind of achievement. The hull adjusted. The window rattled. The stars held their positions the way stars do, which is stubbornly and for longer than any of us will be around to observe. I stayed in the window until the planet completed its arc and moved out of frame. Then I closed the shade, turned off the light and went to sleep. Outside, across 17 systems and 41 represented civilizations, and the slow bureaucratic machinery of a galactic body that was quietly, carefully, seriously reconsidering a great number of things. The work continued. It always continues. That is in the end what we are. Not the Fury, not the fleet, not the doctrine with its open account and its missing expiration clause. The continuation. The name read aloud in a flat-lit room. The photograph in the kit bag. The message forwarded. The registry still open, still receiving, never closing, because that is the nature of what was built, and the people who built it and the 4-year-old girl who held a plastic alien with both hands and decided, without any evidence and without any reason to, that she was going to love it. She was right. I am going to let her be right. That is the thing I carry. That is what I took from everything that happened and decided to keep. Not the Fury. The Fury was real and the Fury was necessary, and the Fury did what Fury is sometimes required to do. But the Fury is not what I hold onto in a window bunk at the end of a shift, watching a nameless planet turn in the light of someone else's sun. I hold onto a girl with a plastic alien and my mother's nose, and 60 years ahead of her that the chart said were a rounding error, and I say, out loud, to nobody in the dark. No, not a rounding error. A person. Her name was Lucia. And I remember her. That is the whole story, that is all of it. The rest is just what remembering looks like when it moves.